Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Axiom Insights on Legal Innovation. I'm Daniel Hayter, Managing Director and VP of Axiom in Europe. Today, we're diving into regulatory innovation in legal services, a topic that's fundamentally reshaping how legal work gets procured, priced, and delivered. The regulatory landscape that's governed legal services for decades is evolving rapidly, particularly in the United States. And understanding these shifts is critical for general counsels navigating an increasingly complex market. I'm thrilled to be joined by Crispin Passmore, one of the foremost experts on legal services regulation globally. Crispin has been at the forefront of regulatory reform and market transformation for more than 20 years. He's advised global investors, innovative legal businesses, law firms, and startups on both sides of the Atlantic. And he's really the first port of call for anyone looking to invest in or navigate the US and UK legal markets. Crispin recently launched Passmore and Oliver Partners, a specialist global legal services strategy and regulation consultancy headquartered here in the UK. His firm works with everyone from regulators and bar associations to investors and founders, helping them understand how to navigate complex regulatory environments while seizing opportunities for growth and innovation. Crispin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Daniel. Pleasure to be here with you and great to be here with Axiom, who I've worked with for years and years. And it's great to be doing this with you today.
Well, it's great to have you. Before we dive in, I am curious. I do follow you on LinkedIn. I see you've been going backwards and forwards to the US several times over the last few months. So whilst you're bouncing between continents that frequently, what's your sort of go-to strategy for staying grounded and productive?
Well, I'm actually just a well-being guru. Anyone that knows me knows that's not true. You just got to survive it, haven't you? It's just travel. It's not that far. It's a 6-7 hour flight to New York. Get some sleep, meet decent people, meet decent clients, spend time with people you like, and then most of the traveling settles into the background quite easily. And New York's a great city, although it's probably a bit cold for me to go there this week.
A bit snowy as well, I think. When you're doing all this traveling, you just talked about there meeting several people, clients, regulators. What's the biggest shift you're seeing in legal services? How GCs are procuring those services? What can you tell us about that? What are sort of the top themes?
Change happens slowly. Hemingway said in one of his novels about somebody going bankrupt that it happened gradually and then suddenly. I think that's how change happens and how the legal market's changing as well. And as you said in the introduction, I've been involved in redesigning regulation and rethinking how markets work across law, across the UK, Europe, the US, beyond that for 20 plus years. And I've always thought it's happening gradually and it's happening very slowly. But it does feel a little bit like we might be at an inflection point, that something might be changing pretty significantly, driven particularly by activity in the US. And I think what that really means is that if you're a GC, if you're buying legal services, or if you're a finance director buying legal services, you've got more choice. You've got more choice about whether you use lawyers or other sorts of people, technology businesses, consultants to solve your problem, accountants. You've got a choice about whether that's technology-led or just technology-empowered, or it's still a traditional, bespoke or human-driven service. And you've increasingly got choice about how you pay. And I think really the inflection point is that gradual recognition amongst the consumer, the buyer of the service, that they're the one in the driving seat, that actually they get to shape this market. They get to decide not just what people offer to them, but what succeeds. What do they value out of the different things that are available? And the acceleration in the last year, I think, is obviously technology. But actually, I think it's about globalization. It's about scale. It's about innovation. There's a whole bunch of forces coming together in the legal market, and it's a great time for someone to have choice in how they buy those services.
And what fascinates me with all that you've just said, one of the things that we've noticed, certainly at Axiom and with a lot of our clients, is those that have panel setups. Those panels seem to be getting smaller. That's one thing that we've noticed. Clients are reducing the number of firms on their panels. We're noticing that law firm rates still increasing significantly in spite of all of that competition and choice that you've just mentioned. So how is that working out for law firms, would you say? Because they're consolidating, GCs are consolidating those firms down on their panels. They're almost creating mini monopolies. And then you're seeing rates go up. And we're also hearing now that some companies are starting to abandon panels entirely, which is opening up to maybe some of the more traditional providers. So a law firm sort of caught in this dynamic somehow?
Yeah, I think some are, and some are better able to respond to it. I think the added context for me is that the market's just growing and growing and growing. That there's an ever more law thick world, compliance, regulatory obligations, deal activity, financial activity, health and safety, people, information security. You go on, and organizations operate in an environment where they need help to deal with these things, and they don't want the people that know the business best, the lawyers inside the business, focused on those routine things. They want them focused on the business specific issues, and that means they want external partners often to do these sorts of issues for them. And what that balance is a choice for each GC. But I think it means that the market's growing. So all of those other pressures on law firms, price pressures, technology pressures, winning the work, all of them are against a feature that the market is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that will continue. So, whilst law firms have to keep responding to the customer and are having to compete against new entrants, from technology businesses to the big four to alternative providers, such as Axiom, as long as they do that, they've got a chance to get a share of a bigger and bigger market. And that means that, they can price accordingly. And as I said earlier, in the end, the GC decides, and they'll decide what they want to buy and from where.
And that's quite interesting. I was speaking to a GC recently who was asking us about our services in light of an invoice he had received from a law firm where they had put on the end of the monthly bill a line item called AI efficiency charge and slapped 3% on top of that. And when he spoke to the partner of the firm managing the relationship, they didn't know what it was for. No one in the law firm seemed to know what it was for, and they got it removed. So how does that stack up? What does that tell us about law firms when they're dealing with that sort of level of transparency? We've talked, you've been in this business longer than me, Crispin, about the death of the billable hour, which is something else that seems to be dying a very slow death by 1,000 cuts. Is AI finally putting that final nail in the coffin of the billable hour, and how a law firm's going to be dealing with that?
So I take this back to choice. I think that the death of the billable hour is probably exaggerated. It's under pressure, and in certain types of work where it's predictable and it's routine, and certainly if it's technology driven, then it's already gone in certain areas and certainly going. But there's other areas where actually bespoke pricing and hourly rates works quite effectively, and it's that plurality and that innovation and that choice that I think is really what we're seeing, which is a feature of competitive markets. The AI levy or the efficiency charge, it's not the first time I've heard that. I understand how that links to the reduction in number of hours if people are deploying technology and they're becoming more efficient. Competition will drive the price in the end. In effective markets, that sort of investment that the law firm makes into technology, or the legal business makes into technology, should reduce its costs over time and allow it to increase its margin, and competition then erodes that over time. We've got to make sure that the market continues to do that and gives people choice. I know of one firm that works with corporates and high net worth individuals and some other work where they give their customers a choice, and they say, we can use the technology that we've invested X million into, and if we use it, we will put an additional levy on, but we think we can serve you better, faster, more efficiently. But we are using that technology. We're using AI. We understand some firms don't like that. So we'll also give you the opportunity to do the same work. We will do it in a more traditional way. They don't mind which the clients choose. And I think that's a really quite smart move from a law firm to say, well, we can do this or we can do that and let you choose. And perhaps in the long run, it'll all be done with technology. And perhaps in the long run, that technology will be just priced in. But as we transition, I think it's quite an interesting idea.
And interesting that you mentioned that. Have they had any early indication as to which way clients are opting to go?
Some are very protective of information and confidentiality, and they really don't want their information put into AI until there's absolute certainty about where it goes and how it's used. They don't want their information being used to train large language models, and they tend to be cautious and say, no, we're not ready to make that switch yet. And others are saying, well, of course you're going to use technology. And some of them will push on price, just like some of them pushed on price on hourly rates. Some will push on price on a AI efficiency charge or a technology levy. I think it's no different, in ordinary law firms, in sort of high street law firms. We've seen law firms charge for onboarding. We've seen them charge for all sorts of elements that are additional fees. Bank transfers. If you're buying a house in the UK, you might pay all sorts of fee alongside the raw legal services fee. Well, perhaps we should just see the technology like that, and the market will dictate whether or not that should be absorbed into the hourly rate or the fixed fee, or whether or not it should be separated out. It's a balance here. Yeah, transparency is a good thing.
I mean, it's sort of history repeating itself. I remember the days when firms would charge back LexisNexis and Westlaw and class it as research. And then clients will say, well, what research is that? And isn't it included in the £500 an hour I'm already paying you? And you can remove that off the final bill sort of thing. And it seems to be happening all over again with AI to an extent.
Yeah, I think that's right. And yeah, we'll get to a sort of a market standard as the mass of consumers, whether they're individual small business or large corporates, and the mass of lawyers and law firms navigate this decision by decision. And a new market standard will emerge, I suspect. And I think in the very long run, you won't be charging separately for technology.
Yeah. Moving on to, I know, a topic that's close to your heart, and that's how capital is reshaping the market. We talked a little bit about panels there. We talked a little bit about the billable hour and a little bit about AI. All of those things are sort of under pressure, and yet private equity is now coming in and pouring a lot of money into law firms. So how are these trends connected, I guess, is my question. And why is this happening now in the US? UK firms have had that regulatory clearance, I believe, since 2007. Since the Legal Services Act. And does this create opportunities for providers who have already been operating outside of traditional partnership structures? And I guess why now?
Yeah, it's pretty routine in the UK or in England and Wales to be precise. Scottish law firms would like to do this, still can't, despite the legislative framework being in place. We'll have to ask the Scottish Law Society about how we can accelerate that. But in England and Wales, it's pretty routine, and there's huge numbers of law firms with external investment, ranging from small firms that have brought a husband or wife into the business as a non-lawyer director, firms that have brought in finance or marketing expertise, through to serious money coming in to accelerate growth. It's been going on for 15 odd years in the UK. It's not been allowed in the US or in most other jurisdictions. But 5 years ago, Arizona allowed ABSs, and there's a significant number of ABSs that have been set up there, ranging again from small technology businesses, large technology businesses, alternative providers, right the way up to KPMG. That, I think, has opened people's eyes into the US about what is possible and what was always possible, even outside of the ABS structure, and models that have been used in other professions, particularly healthcare, veterinary, most recently accounting, CPA audit, where you have more complicated structures than direct investment into the law firm, but it achieves the same thing. And I think awareness of that has really opened people's eyes to what's possible in the US. But I think there's strategic pressures on firms as well. some need to invest in technology that we've just been talking about. It's really hard for most firms to do that out of their in-year cash. They haven't got a balance sheet. They distribute their balance sheet to zero pretty much each year. How do you take a 5 or 10-year view on either investment in technology or an accelerating M&A activity? If you only fund it out of this year's cash, it's really hard. And external capital allows firms to think about technology, lateral hires, M&A, and in the US particularly, how they attract and retain talent through equity programs when they don't have non-compete clauses. And I think with imagination, capital can be used to solve most of those problems. And we've seen lots of deals in recent times, and I think we're going to see a lot more in 2026 and beyond.
And that sort of leads me on to that question, which I think you sort of partially answered. I'm curious as to what problem private equity is actually solving in the legal market. Are they entering law firms because firms need that growth capital, because clients are demanding something different maybe, or because the traditional partnership model is starting to break down?
Well, I think it varies. We've seen it most accelerated in personal injury in the US. I think that's because those firms would benefit from technology. I think there's an opportunity for roll-up activity, M&A activity in personal injury to build national brands across the US, and technology without doubt. But the fact that those firms have often got reasonably concentrated ownership means it's easier to make these sorts of decisions. 3 or 4 partners rather than 100 or 200 partners in a big firm. But I think the thesis is there and works pretty much across the legal market. If you want to accelerate technology, if you want to accelerate M&A, then it's much easier to do with a strong balance sheet. And I think for even the richest firms, the most profitable, fastest growing firms that perhaps have less need for that capital, if you can create an equity structure, you can create long-term incentive plans, management incentive plans, and you've got a new independently market valued currency of ownership that you can offer to lateral hires that vests over a period of time, and it does the heavy lifting that a non-compete clause would do in any other industry. And I think that's really attractive for firms and for their leadership, to attract and retain talent that really underpins growth. And some of these law firms are huge. They're $2, $3, $5, $8, $9 billion revenue, but they're still a sixth of the size of the big 4 accounting firms, and perhaps smaller still than Accenture and McKinsey and Bain and people like this. So if we look 20 years forward, perhaps the big law firms have really got to get much, much bigger as professional services perhaps blend into each other over a long period of time. And they need capital to do that.
And I'm assuming that private equity capital is going to be used in a blended fashion, as you talked about there, right? It's going to be a mixture of technology, it's going to be talent acquisition, it's going to be M&A in particular. We're seeing the continued march of US law firms into the UK in particular. So I'm assuming that private equity capital, based on your advice and what you've seen so far, I'm assuming is going to be used for a number of different initiatives.
I would say to law firms, don't start with the money, start with your strategy. What is it that you offer to consumers? What's the problem you're going to solve for them? Whether that's individual or corporate consumers, what's your unique offer to them? And what are the people, technology you need to deliver those solutions? And does that lead to a need for capital? Because you shouldn't sell a bit of your business unless you need to. If you can finance out of your ambitions and what you want to do and your strategy out of in-year cash, great, go for it. If you can do it with bank debt, well, that's cheaper than equity. But if you need substantial capital and you need patient long-term capital beyond the year end that a law firm partnership tends to have for money, then private equity can be a great partner. And then it's about selecting the right partner, not just chasing the valuation. Who are the people, have they got the technology expertise or the M&A activity? Can you find the right partner that meets your strategy?
And how do you think that external investment, because some of it can be quite substantial to your point, how does that change a law firm's behavior?
Oh, it certainly changes culture, doesn't it? law firms are social constructs as much as they are financial machines or corporate entities. There's ways of behaving, there's ways of thinking. There's, most typified really by the whole idea of lawyer and non-lawyer. And that served them well. They've built great businesses and at the top end, hugely fast growing and hugely profitable businesses. So I wouldn't wish it to come across as saying I'm criticizing them, but if they want to use external money and partner with private equity, that does need to change, and they need to probably accelerate the deployment of an executive corridor in their firm. It can't just be, okay, it's this lawyer's turn to oversee marketing, or this lawyer's going to be overseeing our technology. You've really got to get the most elite people commensurate with your size and your investment plans along that executive corridor. And you've got to think about how do you incentivize all of your talent beyond just dangling, the promise of partnership to a few of the lawyers through their career. It just leads to the corporatization of the business. And that's culturally different, as well as, management style, all of those sorts of things. And there's an accountability that comes with spending other people's money. So it's big changes for law firms.
And do you think there's a danger then that it becomes more about financial outcomes than client outcomes?
If I was running a 2 or 3 billion law firm now, I'd probably think it's quite a lot about the financial outcomes already.
Okay.
But I think that, in the end,
but that's someone else's money, though, isn't it? That's the bit.
Of course, and that changes it. But if you're a law firm leader now, you're responsible for, the ability of everybody in your business, from the most junior staff to pay their mortgages and pay their bills at the month end, to your most successful staff who really can walk out the door quite easily and earn substantial amounts of money somewhere else. So you've got that pressure already as a law firm leader. I think it's not that, these pressures don't exist and then suddenly they do exist. I think it's just about adapting to context and to change. And the elite law firm partners are already good at that. That's how they've built such successful businesses. As the same in, the professional services firms, the technology businesses, the consulting or alternative providers. Great leaders build great businesses by building great teams. And I don't think external money changes that. It just changes the context for that a little bit.
And you said, just going back to something you said earlier, you said we need to stop thinking about ALSPs versus law firms, and we need to start thinking about innovators versus those who aren't. So can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think boundaries are breaking down in some ways. 20 years ago, the ALSP was a very novel idea, and it was coming along to solve a particular problem, and it needed to show itself as different. But actually now it's part of the ecosystem, and you're all established and accepted across the world, actually. And the boundaries between what you do, what a law firm does, what a technology business does is blurred a little bit more. And also it's a lot more blurring, not just by what you deliver, but how you partner with each other as well, and how clients and corporates deploy you. And that might link to the sort of evolution of the use of panels, or even the reduction or ending of them in some circumstances. So I think boundaries are breaking down. In the end, what do clients want? They don't want law firms or ALSPs or technology business. They want good value, high quality solutions to the problems they're trying to resolve. And, if they're demanding enough, they'll demand that you work out how to solve that, not they piece together different bits of the market. And I think that's why the boundaries break down over time. And regulation should facilitate that. I think it does in England and Wales. It does less so in the US, where unauthorized practice of law regime really gets in the way of client-focused services.
So those, as you say, I guess those concentric circles when it comes to law firms and ALSPs and other delivery providers are getting much closer together. They're almost sitting on top of each other. And the A in ALSP is no longer alternative, right? Is now run of the mill, as far as we're concerned. So thinking about that, what does real innovation now look like in legal service delivery? Because, as you say, it was novel 20, 25 years ago when Axiom started the sector. But what does it look like now moving forward? What does that innovation look like down the road?
I wish I knew. I'd be sat doing a startup and raising some money and coming up with a magic answer on a route to riches. I don't know. It's got to be partly technology, hasn't it? I don't know where that's going to go, but large language models are clearly reshaping the way we think about the delivery of legal services, and the potential is there for more change. I'm always a bit cautious about saying, and that's the answer, because I think it's probably one of the answers. And I don't know anywhere near enough about the technology to be able to say, and in 5 years' time, something's going to come past large language models that gets to a better solution in a different way. I suspect something will. So, yeah, the innovation is going to come from technology. The question then is, culturally, how does innovation fit? How much risk do GCs want to take, law firm leaders want to take, entrepreneurs and innovators want to take? And I suspect that will be different in different bits of the market and with different types of work. So routine work, I think we can go to innovation faster. And I think in the consumer space, people like LawHive and Rocket Lawyer and LegalZoom are trying to do that. I think in the corporate space, the way Axiom's focused on technology, the way the Big Four, particularly KPMG, I think, is focused on technology, but also real new entrants like Udia. There's people there that are trying to use technology to solve discrete problems really quite aggressively with technology, and that really does shape the market. We might see them move up the value chain over time.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was an elite lawyer at the top of a law firm, I wouldn't be that worried. I think, we're a long way away from the top of the pyramid being disrupted. They might be enabled by more technology. They might need less of a pyramid in their law firm. It might change the shape of law firms, but there's still going to be, that need for people that have done this rare thing many times before, that are the conciliary to chief execs. So, to me, all of this innovation is about a wider variety of solutions that are tailored rather than law is delivered like this, take it or leave it.
Mm. And if you think about it from the buyer's perspective there, just sort of touching on what you said, how do they cut through that AI hype, the GSINs, to understand what providers are genuinely delivering, whether it's ALSPs or law firms? What are they delivering in terms of technology, pricing, value? It's not just about what do we automate? Who do we get rid of? It's not just about faster billing or repackaged hourly arrangements. So any advice on how they sort of cut through that AI hype?
Well, they're better at it than me, no doubt. They're doing it day in, day out. But for what it's worth, I'd say don't think you have to be the technology expert as a consumer. Be demanding, but demanding about things that you care about, not that the provider cares about. So be demanding about price, whether that's high or low, or predictability. Be demanding about pace, whether or not you value instant or something can take its time. Be clear and certain about what you think value looks like, and then be demanding on them to come up with different ways of doing that. When I'm buying a laptop or a mobile phone, I don't go to any of the providers and say I want it to be like this. I look across the market and I make a choice about what I value based on what's offer. But if somebody's not delivering what I want, I go somewhere else. That's the real power of a GC, is I can go somewhere else for this. So if you've got clarity about what you want, you don't have to design the product and the service, leave them to do that, but be really demanding about the quality, value, pricing, timing, etc. that you want.
And thinking about that pricing transparency, the technology, the value creation as we go into 2026, what are maybe two or three of the really tough questions GC should be asking of potential providers? Because it is certainly, from my perspective in the UK, a very crowded space. It's a very competitive space. I would argue we probably have the most discerning buyers of anywhere in the world of legal services in the UK, very advanced. And, so given the amount of choice, given the pace of change with technology, given, the changes we've talked about, what are sort of two or three of the really tough questions GC should be asking this year?
So I think I'd be saying, they'll have their own questions about price and price predictability and technology. But I think I'd be saying to the key partners I have as my suppliers, and how are you going to make this cheaper, better, faster, higher quality next year and the year after? Because I'm not looking for prices to go up and quality to go down. So I'd be looking for a long-term relationship that's really demanding, where the client shares the success that's undoubtedly can come from technology, innovation, new models. And I want that built into my pricing and my structure now.
Interesting. And thinking about, we sort of talked about private equity, we've talked about the technology bit. Clearly, with a lot of these startups, some of the new technology companies that you've mentioned, there's a greater appetite for risk tolerance. Whereas in law firms, we know they're quite risk averse. So how do you square that circle there with these firms that are a little bit more risk hungry versus a traditional law firm or a traditional GC rather, that would engage them, whose appetite for risk is probably a lot less?
I think you've just got to keep segmenting the market. I think it's really hard, and you've got to work out whether you're the consumer side or the provider side. You've got to work out where's it best placed to take risk, and where is it that you need to be looking for certainty, and carve out, if you're a consumer, but also I think if you're a supplier, carve out the areas where you think you can take more risk or offer more risk taking in that relationship, and work out how to share responsibility for that risk across the supply and the consumption side. And then work out, well, how do you do that differently in the areas where the risk taking isn't yet there? And that will be different in different types of work and for different suppliers, different consumers as well. So, I think increasingly my message across all of this is there's a fragmentation happening as well. There's different types of work, need different types of solution, and technology and innovation allow us to get to those sorts of answers, rather than one size fits all. Lawyer in a law firm is the answer to GC needing some help.
And what differentiators do you think should GCs actually care about? Is it global footprint? Is it flexibility in resourcing and pricing? Is it data and insights? Is it risk? Is it value?
It's probably all of them. And the one we haven't touched on much is that data and insights. I think that's a real potential differentiator for suppliers to be able to help GCs and help finance directors and help businesses solve problems other than legal advice on a bespoke or mass-produced basis. How do we give you the information to get to different outcomes without us having to deal with every case individually? I think we're really at the beginning of that, but I think that's going to be a real feature of innovation in the next 5 years.
Now, I'm going to ask you one thing that I know you're not going to like, Crispin, and that's to look into the future a little bit. But what does that legal procurement maybe look like in the future? We talked about panels and the potential of panels fading out. We talked about the billable hours remaining under existential pressure. We've talked about private equity coming in and gaining advantages for some firms. We've talked about potentially work being commoditized. So what's the end game for law firms, ALSPs, other providers, and who's best positioned to win in that sort of new landscape?
So I think the theme across the market for me is consolidation. I think that we're going to see a significant consolidation within each market, within each vertical segment, within each geographical area, and globally. And I think that applies for advice to individual consumers, small business, corporates, global corporations. But I think that beyond that, we're obviously going to see more technology. I think we'll see more boundaries broken down. I think one of the things that happens as you get global footprints and money flowing into markets is regulatory regimes have to catch up, because if they don't, they become irrelevant. And I think we'll see that in the US. I think we'll see that around the rest of the world as well. And while they might not all adopt ABSs, I think they'll all come to terms with external investment into law firms over the next few years. And we will therefore see the legal market behave in economic terms much like every other market, We'll still need to protect the ethics. We'll still need to protect the rule of law, but we can do that without interfering with the economics of the market. And I think we're on the cusp of economics really driving behavior in this market and leading to more innovation, more choice, greater value, new products, new services, new opportunities for innovators and entrepreneurs.
But with fewer, potentially larger, more platform-like providers, I assume.
Well, I think both. Most markets, as they mature, is the middle that gets hollowed out. We get, a significant share of the market goes to a small number of players, but huge tail of innovators, small businesses, locally focused producers, specialist producers, and new entrants. It's the middle that's used to be called big, but is been bypassed. And I think if I was in those sorts of firms and businesses, I'd be thinking really hard about what my strategy is. Is it get big? Is it get niche? Or is it get out?
Well, Crispin, this has been a fascinating conversation about how regulation, capital and innovation are converging to reshape legal services. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with us today.
Absolute pleasure, Daniel. Always fun to talk to you and to spend time with the Axiom friends. Love to come back one day.
We'd love to have you back on. So for our listeners, if you're navigating regulatory complexity, considering investment in the legal sector, or just trying to understand where this market is headed, I'd strongly encourage you to check out Crispin's work at Passmore and Oliver Partners. You can find them at passmoreoliver.com. And for more insights on regulatory innovation, alternative legal service providers, and the evolving landscape of in-house legal work, please visit us at axiomlaw.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to resources and contact information related to today's show. Stay tuned to Axiom Insights on Legal Innovation for more conversations on the topics that matter most to in-house legal teams. I'm Daniel Hayter, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.